Number 5. North Brother Island, New York. The North Brother Island is one of 2 small islands located in the East River of New York City. The island remained uninhabited until 1885, with the only trace of humanity being a small lighthouse that was erected in 1869. The island began seeing more use in 1885 when the Riverside Smallpox Hospital moved from Roosevelt Island to North Brother when their mission expanded to treating and isolating victims of other quarantinable diseases such as typhoid, tuberculosis, and especially polio. In 1904, a steamship called the General Slocum was set ablaze, and over 1,000 people perished, either from the fire or from drowning while trying to escape, and ended up washing ashore on the island. Of course, many people have reported seeing a ghostly steamship in the years since, and sightings of the spectral victims of the fire are reported from afar, with them wandering the beach of the island, seemingly lost and in pain. One of the most famous residents at the hospital was Mary Mallon, otherwise known as Typhoid Mary, who was confined on the island for 20 years until her death in 1938, after being declared a public health menace for infecting between 51 and 122 people while working as a cook. As public health measures like vaccines began to be adopted in the 30s and 40s, the need for a quarantine hospital lessened to the point where the hospital was closed. It was converted into housing for war veterans who were going to school in the city following World War II, before being converted into a rehabilitation facility for young people suffering from substance abuse issues. But it was closed in 1963 due to the cost of upkeep and the widespread corruption of the staff. In the years since, it was considered for a variety of purposes, including housing for the homeless and an extension of the jail at Rikers Island, but the danger of the unmarked manholes and the advanced dilapidation of the buildings, which are mostly collapsed and overrun by poison ivy, resulted in such ideas being abandoned. It was eventually decided that the site would serve as a bird sanctuary for herons and other wading shorebirds. Although many of the original 25 buildings are still standing in some shape or form, it has been made off limits to the public and is only available for supervised visits for those intending to go ashore for, quote, compelling academic and scientific purposes. With its history of confinement and death, perhaps it is for the best that this site has been deemed unfit for public visitation, although the history of the island is indeed compelling. Number 4. Boblo Island Amusement Park, Ontario. North America has no shortage of amusement parks for families and thrill seekers alike to visit. The Canadian province of Ontario has several to choose from, including Canada's Wonderland, Great Wolf Lodge, and Splashdown Niagara. One theme park that you won't be able to buy a ticket for, however, is the Boblo Island Amusement Park, located on the island of Bois Blanc, just above the mouth of the Detroit River. The park was opened in 1898 and used a ferry system to service guests from Ontario and Detroit and bring them to the island, where they had a variety of attractions to keep them occupied and having fun. Some of these included the Falling Star, a log flume, a theater, a sky tower, Ferris wheel, a zoo, a carousel, and a dance hall, financed by Henry Ford. It also had 3 roller coasters, the Screamer, the Nightmare, and the Sky Streak. It also had Boblo's Scootaboats, which were essentially aquatic bumper cars. The park operated for many years before eventually closing down for financial reasons in late 1993. There are still ferries that operate in order to get island residents on and off the island, but the now abandoned amusement park has been declared off limits by the property owners. Of course, the dilapidated carousel building, dance pavilion, and sky tower have since proven to be too appealing for urban explorers to keep away from, and the eerie, overgrown site still sees a variety of visitors. Like any good amusement park, it of course has a reputation for being haunted by a variety of ghosts. My personal favorite of the ghost stories is the story of Smiley the Magician. Back when the theater still operated and showed a variety of different performers, one of the most consistently booked performers of the 30s and 40s was a magician named Smiley Smilovich. Smiley was an old-school magician who had trained with Houdini in the late 20s, and was known for his seemingly death-defying tricks. One of his most famous tricks was a metamorphosis trick, where he would put a trunk on stage, climb into it, lock it, and then have the trunk set on fire. He would escape through a trap door, the trunk would burn away, revealing that he had escaped, and the crowd would go wild. One day he was doing this trick as usual, but when he locked himself in the trunk, he had a heart attack and died. The trunk was then set on fire, and the audience was left in terror as Smiley's body burned in front of them. Ever since then, Smiley's ghost would apparently haunt the theater, being sighted watching shows that were performed there, showing a special interest in magic shows. In the years since the park's closure, the occasional rumor of the magician being spotted has come up from the various urban explorers checking out the overgrown buildings. Would you ever be brave enough to explore Boblo Island Amusement Park? And if you did, would you be on the lookout for spectral magicians? Number 3. Bangar Fort, India. This 17th century fortress has a reputation for being the most haunted place in India, with people refusing to build homes near the fort for fear of falling under its curse. Despite this reputation, there is some debate as to why it is haunted, with two very different stories being told. In the first story, a king named Madho Singh wanted to build the fort but needed the permission of an ascetic monk who lived on the nearby land. The monk granted him permission to build the fort, but warned him that the fort's shadow must never fall upon the monk's home. Madho agreed to these terms and built the fort to the specifications. However, one of his successors added to the fortifications vertically, causing the fort's shadow to engulf the forbidden home, causing the fort to fall to ruin and become haunted. Another version of the tale is that an evil sorcerer fell in love with a beautiful princess named Ratnavati. She rebuffed his advances, so he bewitched a cosmetic that she was going to use that would force her to fall in love with him. She found out about this scheme and poured the cosmetic onto a large boulder, which then crushed the sorcerer. With his dying breath, the sorcerer cursed the fort so that no one would ever be able to live there in peace. The fort is open to the public during the day, but it is forbidden to set foot on the property at night, as that is when the hauntings occur, with several people who have tried to disprove the ghost by staying overnight, going missing, or coming out catatonic. Number 2. The Paris Catacombs. When you consider how many locations like old houses or abandoned mental institutions have a reputation for being haunted due to the discovery of just a few bodies, it comes as no surprise that many of the world's catacombs have apparently been discovered to be haunted by specters of the past. Take for example the Paris Catacombs. Built as a mass grave in the 18th century in order to deal with the overflowing of local cemeteries, the Paris Catacombs hold the remains of millions of Parisians. A few years after being established, Louis-Étienne Héricard decided to make the catacombs a work of art by arranging the bones into elaborate displays. An inscription in the catacombs even reads, "Arrête, c'est ici l'Empire de la Mort," which translates to "Stop, this is the Empire of the Dead." Although a small section of the catacombs are available for visitors to peruse, the vast majority of the seemingly endless tunnels are banned for tourists to visit. In the years since they were constructed, there have been several reports of ghosts wandering the halls of the labyrinth-like grave, searching for a way out. As if that weren't bad enough, rumor has it that if you come into the catacombs at night, you will hear the whispers of all the spirits of the catacombs, trying to convince you to venture deeper and deeper into the catacombs until you become lost and unable to find your way out. Another often reported ghost is that of Philibert Asper, who was a doorman at the Val de Grace Hospital, who made his way into the catacombs in late 1793 when he was sent to fetch liquor from a cellar, with only the light of a candle to find his way out. He soon became lost and confused. It is also theorized that he was quite drunk at the time. His candle eventually went out and it became pitch black. He was missing for 11 years before his remains were found and identified due to the hospital keys and the bottle of liquor in his hand. He was interred in the catacombs at the exact location where he was found. In the years since, urban explorers calling themselves cataphiles have reported seeing the spirit of Asper wandering the halls of the catacombs with his candle on the anniversary of him going missing. The cataphiles are known for paying their respects at his grave, and they have named his spirit the protector of the cataphiles. Number 1. Poveglia Island, Italy. In the lagoon between Venice and Lido, you will find the small island known as Poveglia. It was first inhabited in the year 421, when mainlanders relocated to the island to escape barbarian invaders. Due to its small size, the island was easily defensible, and frankly not worth the trouble for invaders to bother attacking. The small community stayed on the island for centuries, enjoying their independence from taxes and laws of the mainland, but their population eventually dwindled, leaving the island uninhabited. This changed in the year 1348, when the bubonic plague was ravaging Venice and the surrounding towns. Poveglia became a quarantine island, with symptomatic Italians being banished there to die. The center of the island had a giant pyre, where tens of thousands of plague victims' bodies were burnt to prevent the spread of the disease. When the plague returned in the year 1630, the island became a quarantine colony, once again, with even more bodies being burnt in the town square. Naturally, the location developed a reputation for being haunted by the tens of thousands of displaced and abandoned plague victims, but the island's creepy history was far from over. Aside from a brief period where Napoleon used the island to store gunpowder, relying on the ghost stories of the place to keep unwanted visitors away, the island remained largely uninhabited until an insane asylum was built on the island in the late 1800s. It was a brutal hospital that was poorly constructed and used more to exile the patients from society than to help rehabilitate them. One of the doctors working there in the 30s conducted strange and cruel experiments on the patients for years, before going mad himself and flinging himself from the bell tower. Though this bell tower was removed years ago, people still claim to hear the sound of the bells emanating from the island. The hospital became an old folks' home briefly, but that closed in 1975, leaving the island completely abandoned. A construction crew tried to restore the hospital, but suddenly stopped, refusing to return to the island due to how intensely haunted the island has become. The government has banned anyone from visiting the island, but its reputation has made it an infamous and terrifying location.
Number 5 on this list is Goody Cole. Now, Goody Cole is a little interesting because today she is not a physical witch, but the ghost of her former witch-like self. Back in the 1600s in Hampton in the United States, Goody Cole lived with her older husband at the time. Once 1656 rolled around though, she didn't live with him anymore. Goody Cole was arrested and found guilty of witchcraft. It was said that she had a mumbling habit, looked extremely witch-like, and also had some animal-related deaths tracked back to her in what would have been used for apparent rituals. It was also said that she was capable of turning herself into an animal and would often do so to disguise herself and trick others. When she was arrested, she was treated extremely poorly, often tortured, starved, and this whole process went on for years. After 6 years of this, she petitioned to be released so that she could support her husband, who was close to death at the time. The court agreed that they would let her do this, but she had to pay a sizable fee that she obviously didn't have access to because she was in jail. Her husband eventually died alone without the support of his wife, something that was said to eat at Goody's conscience continually. Now, the manner of Goody Cole's death is sort of up in the air. Some say that she was stabbed with a stake for being a witch, others say that she was finally released, but she was so old that she died in her home alone soon after, whereas some people say that she just died in prison. But one thing's for certain, Goody Cole was so unhappy with the people of Hampton actually that she never left. Many people in the area have reported in the older parts of town that they still see a dark, shadowy figure resembling an old woman. A phantom all in white that stalks people through the streets and can be seen in the windows looking down upon you as you walk through the city. People believe that this witch won't cause you any harm, but her goal is to make you feel as ostracized as possible, the exact way that she was made to feel back when she was still living. Number 4 on this list are the Boo Hags. Typically associated with the haunting of the coastal plains of South Carolina, it should be noted that there's no reason to believe that they could only be limited to this area, but there has been a large amount of activity of them here. Now, I should also note that the jury is still a little bit out on if these creatures are exclusively witches or exclusively vampires. I think that the truth of the matter is probably a horrifying mixture of both. Legend says that the Boo Hag needs to get sustenance from a person's breath, and that's how they sustain themselves. This action is somewhat similar to how the Dementors act in Harry Potter, but still with some notable differences. For starters, a Boo Hag is a fleshy creature that does not have any skin of its own. Therefore, it is simply a red tendon-esque humanoid being. Because they don't have any skin of their own, they will often steal the skin of their victims and fit it to their bodies until that skin inevitably deteriorates. The action of sucking someone's breath isn't as simple as my Harry Potter example either. Typically, once a Boo Hag finds a suitable victim, they will stalk that individual back to their home and wait until they're sleeping. Once they're passed out, the Boo Hag will break into their home and straddle the person who is asleep. This action is referred to by locals as a riding from a Boo Hag. Now, if the person wakes during this process and struggles, they will steal your skin and leave you for dead, but oftentimes you don't even realize that this is happening to you. They will suck your energy and it will put you into a deep catatonic-like state. After they've gotten their necessary energy, they'll leave you alone, and you'll wake the next morning feeling drowsy most likely, not even realizing that you were ridden from a buhag. Number 3 on this list is the White Witch of the Rose Hall Plantation in Jamaica. The Rose Hall Plantation is near Montego Bay. However, the witch in question is the ghost of a witch named Annie Palmer, and Annie Palmer wasn't from Jamaica at all. In fact, Annie Palmer spent most of her life in Haiti. She was born there and lived there with her parents for quite some time until they sadly passed away due to yellow fever. Afterwards, she was adopted by a witch who wasn't shy in passing her gifts on to young Annie. Regularly practicing witchcraft and voodoo, Annie soon became a strong witch in her own right. After she grew up, she moved to Jamaica and married John Palmer, taking his last name. Now this is where things get a little bit crazy though. Annie murdered John Palmer. Then she got married again and murdered that husband. And then she got married again and murdered that husband. You'd think that these guys would have recognized that marrying Annie might not have been the best idea, but I guess love just conquers all. Annie didn't stop with her husbands though. She murdered countless slaves that worked on that plantation. This was right up until she was murdered herself by a slave named Taku. The people back then attempted to perform a voodoo ritual on this witch, not wanting to have her ever return again. However, it didn't work the way that they intended it to. The voodoo ritual actually trapped her at this location, and now she's said to be forever haunting the Rose Hall on Montego Bay. People have seen her ghost before, and they've heard screaming coming from nothing. The vision of a woman in white will appear sometimes, and it is said that if you stay at this plantation too long, then some deep misfortune will fall upon you or your family. So beware. Number 2 on this list is Jenny Greenteeth. Jenny Greenteeth is a witch in British folklore that is said to haunt the waters of Lancashire, Cheshire, and Shropshire. I know, it's a lot of shires. Jenny is a river witch and lives in the rivers of these areas looking for victims to drag down with her. As you'd imagine, with a name like Greenteeth, her appearance is pretty grotesque. Green algae-like hair, a wrinkled witchy face, skin that is the same color as a bog, and a weird fleshy exterior. Jenny is certainly not a looker. But I suppose it doesn't matter a whole lot, as she uses the swamp like water and pond scum to mask her appearance so you can't see her beneath the filth. The origin of Jenny Greenteeth is still up for debate, but the bare bones of the tale are pretty consistent. Jenny was a girl in a local British town who was the victim to some heavy bullying. One day when she was at her job getting water from the well, somebody yelled at her that they hope she falls in and dies. Well, that's exactly what happened. Her spirit manifested as Jenny Greenteeth, this old hag who now haunts the waters in this area. Jenny is not simply a harmless witch either. She preys on people, specifically children that get too close to the water. Sometimes she will try to lure them towards the riverbank by calling out to them or singing a tune where no one can figure out where it's coming from. Now this tactic is one that we've talked about on this channel before with the Utah water babies and is very successful. She lunges her hand out and grabs them, dragging them into the water where they will drown and never be seen again. This water witch is known by all the locals in the area, with everyone having some slightly different adaptations to the legend. General consensus though, if you hear someone singing from the rivers of Britain, don't go near it. Number 1 on this list is La Lechuza. La Lechuza is a witch based in Mexican folklore that is said to haunt the Mexican nights. I wish I could pinpoint the location down for you guys to be a specific region in Mexico, but this witch is sadly far too mobile for that. La Lechuza used to live in a small Mexican town and regularly practice witchcraft. Her intentions were foul though, and would regularly cause harm to others, whether that be to them directly or to their livelihood. The townsfolk, once they discovered that she was the cause of their misfortune, raided her home and viciously murdered her. They didn't kill her well enough though, because her spirit still clings to life to this day. Said to regularly take the form of an owl and fly throughout Mexico, La Lechuza is constantly on the hunt for food. Her preferred meal is young men. This bird is apparently massive, and once it sets its sights on you, it will be nearly impossible to escape. Some people have reported that she is so big that they've seen her run cars off of the road and eat her victims in the wreck. She also employs some other tactics instead of just brute force. Sometimes she will mask her voice as a baby and sit outside your door until you open it, and then she'll pounce. You may also hear the consistent racket of an owl howling in the night go and check your window to see what the commotion is and become this owl lady's dinner. Basically, she is a giant owl that you can't run from, you can't beat in a fight, and is also able to outwit you with some strange tactics. She haunts all of Mexico, and you just need to hope that if you were there, she doesn't pick you to be her next meal.
Coming in at number 5, we have Isle of Wight in England. Located off the south coast of England, it's known for its beaches and seafront promenades such as sandy Shanklin Beach and south-facing Ventnor Beach, which is dotted with vintage beach huts. The Isle of Wight is reputed to be one of the spookiest places in the UK and is often referred to by enthusiasts as Ghost Island. Ventnor Botanics Ghostly Gardens is known for its beautiful plants, but also as the most haunted place on the Isle of Wight. Long before it became the tourist attraction it is today, the Ventnor Botanic Gardens used to be the location of the Royal National Hospital, where patients were treated for the deadly killer disease tuberculosis. Over the years, thousands unfortunately died at the hospital until it was finally closed and demolished in 1969. Since the building was demolished and the gardens created, there have been many ghostly sightings. Some guests have seen a woman dressed in a patient gown walking around the gardens, although you can never get close enough to speak with her. Others have encountered a nurse walking up and down the gardens as if she is checking in on patients. There are several remnants of the old hospital still remaining, including a dark Victorian refuse tunnel which leads out from the gardens to the edge of the cliff. The lighthouse at St. Catherine's Point is a spectacular place to watch storms work their way across the English Channel, and on clear nights gives a perfect view of the stars and Milky Way, making it a popular spot for night photography. But you may find more than just keen photographers on a late night visit. There are many spooky tales surrounding the lighthouse, which is located near the village of Nitton on the south of the Isle of Wight. These range from ghost animal sightings to unexpected footsteps and vanishing items. There was a tragedy that happened at the lighthouse during World War II while 3 watchers were on duty. A bomb was dropped, killing all 3 of the guards. A plaque was placed in their memory, but it is said that they still keep watch at the lighthouse, which is now fully automated. There are several other haunted locations on the Isle, all with their own stories and ghosts. Would you want to make a trip to discover all of them? Coming in at number 4, we have the Paris Catacombs in France. The Paris Catacombs are underground ossuaries in Paris, France. An ossuary is a chest, box, building, well, or a site made to serve as the final resting place of human skeletal remains. They are frequently used where burial space is scarce. A body is first buried in a temporary grave, then after some years the skeletal remains are removed and placed in an ossuary. Due to this taking up much less space than a coffin, it means more remains can be stored. Due to this, the Paris Catacombs holds the remains of more than 6 million people. There are plenty of urban legends and ghost stories lurking in the skeletal maze. In the late 18th century, when major public health problems tied to the city's cemeteries led to a decision to transfer their contents to an underground site, the site was consecrated as the Paris Municipal Ossuary on April 7, 1786, and from that time forward took on the mythical name of the Catacombs, in reference to the Roman catacombs, which had fascinated the public since the discovery. Starting in 1809, the catacombs was open to the public by appointment. As you walk through the maze of the catacombs, the walls are paved with human remains. Skulls are propping up other bones as you work your way. While the catacombs span almost 200 miles long, only about a mile of the tunnels is open to the public, and yet that hasn't stopped others from trying to enter the closed-off areas of the catacombs through its many secret entrances hidden around Paris. During the course of the French Revolution, it is said that thousands of remains were dumped unceremoniously in the stone quarries that became the catacombs, so there is no clear record of exactly who and how many people's remains live in the tunnels. There have been many stories from the catacombs. One event even inspired the film As Above So Below from 2014, which I love and I've referenced many times on this channel. There was a group touring the catacombs who came across a video camera that had been left behind. It appeared to have been there a long time. It was covered in dust and was hard to see unless you were looking in depth. To their surprise, the camera had footage still on it. As they watched it, it appeared to show a man lost in the catacombs. They saw as he slowly went mad. Unable to find a way out, the footage stopped abruptly when he dropped to the camera. It is said that the man nor his remains were ever found, and all they had to know that he was ever down there was this footage. They also heard disturbing noises on the footage, screams that did not come from the man recording. They witnessed some things that they could not explain. The legend says that if you are inside of the Paris catacombs after midnight, the walls begin to speak. Disembodied voices will try to persuade you to venture deeper and deeper into the catacombs until you can't find your way out. In at number 3, we have RMS Queen Mary in Long Beach, California. From the time her construction construction began in 1930 in Clydebank, Scotland, the Queen Mary was destined to stand in a class all on her own. Despite suffering economic setbacks during the Great Depression, which stalled construction on the ship for several years, Cunard Line spared no expense on building the Queen Mary. On May 27, 1936, the Queen Mary departed from Southampton in England, embarking on her maiden voyage. She boasted 5 dining areas and lounges, 2 cocktail bars and swimming pools, a grand ballroom, a squash court, and even a small hospital. The Queen Mary had set a new benchmark in transatlantic travel, which the rich and famous considered as the only civilized way to travel. She quickly seized the hearts and imaginations of the public on both sides of the Atlantic, representing the spirit of an era known for its elegance, class, and style. During its first 3 years at sea, the Queen Mary carried dignitaries and Hollywood celebrities including General Dwight Eisenhower, Elizabeth Taylor, and Audrey Hepburn. However, her days as the luxury liner she was designed to be were short-lived, and in 1939 it was painted a camouflaged grey colour and was stripped of its amenities and began its second life as the Grey Ghost, a World War II troop ship. The Queen Mary was the largest and fastest troop ship to sail, capable of transporting as many as 16,000 troops at 30 knots. After the end of World War II, the Queen Mary began a 10-month retrofitting process which would return the ship to her original glory. On July 21, 1947, the Queen Mary resumed regular passenger service across the Atlantic Ocean, and continued to do so for nearly 2 more decades. The Queen Mary is now a floating hotel, holding luxury events and putting on shows. However, her days in the war could not be wiped away with her restoration, and it is said a number of spirits live on the ship today. Certain rooms have even been closed to the public due to their paranormal activity. Stateroom B340 has been investigated by many different scare enthusiasts, and even featured on Sci-Fi Channel's Ghost Hunters and the British TV series Most Haunted. The first reports of paranormal activity in room B340 date all the way back to 1967, with the guest complaining that someone was knocking on her door during the night, but when she got up to confront them, no one was there. Other complaints include bathroom lights turning on by themselves, the sink faucet turning on and off on its own, and unexplained bathroom doors shutting. Some guests have reported the covers of their bed being pulled off while asleep and waking to see a dark figure standing at the foot of the bed. But who is the figure in room B340? It is said that along with a number of deaths aboard during the war, there was also a murder in one of the rooms. Could this be the victim in room B340? This is not the only ghost on board. Another famous tale is that of a young man who worked on the ship. One night in 1966, the watertight doors in the engine and boiler rooms were ordered to be closed. About 5 minutes later, an 18-year-old crew member was found crushed in the door of hatch 13, trapped with his arms pinned to his side. They pulled him out and rushed him to hospital, but it was already too late. His ghost is regularly seen around the area now, with people reporting the sound of someone running behind them and whistling. Others have noticed that spots of grease that look like fingerprints appeared on their faces. Some have seen a figure of a bearded man in blue overalls that looks just like the man who died out the corner of their eyes, and several others have said that they saw an engineer wandering the hallways asking if guests had seen his wrench, but when they went back to find him, he had disappeared. Coming in at number 2, we have Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. This menacing Gothic-style prison opened in Philadelphia in 1829 and became the first in the US to implement solitary confinement, a widely debated practice. It was seen as an experiment on how this practice could be used around the world. Spectators from around the world marveled at its grand architecture. Once built, it was the most expensive construction in the United States at the time. It was a cruel attempt to reform prisoners, the idea being that solitude would lead to penance. Critics, on the other hand, believed it incited emotional anguish comparable to physical torture. They must have found it to be a successful experiment, with the prison replicated in several other states and in Europe. Prisoners were kept in small brick rooms with only one slither of light coming from above. They had no windows or any other type of stimulant while in there. They would receive daily contact from the warden and overseers. If they did have to be moved around the building, a hood was placed over their heads so that they would not have a glimpse of the outside world. They saw this as a system of reform rather than punishment. The warden was legally required to visit every inmate every day, and the overseers were mandated to see each inmate 3 times a day. It is even said that Pep the dog was sentenced to life without parole for killing Governor Gifford Pinchot's wife's cat. Prison records reflect that Pep was assigned an inmate number C2559, which is seen in his mugshot, although some claim he was gifted to the prisoner's therapy dog to help inmates. Gangster Al Capone spent a year imprisoned at Eastern State, where he furnished his cell with luxurious antiques, rugs, and paintings, making it seem like inmates had some control and comfort over their lives. However, the prison's 142-year history is full of death, madness, disease, murder, and torture, making it easy to imagine the spirits of troubled souls left behind to roam its abandoned halls. The harsh punishments used on prisoners are enough to make you shiver even without seeing a ghost. There was the water bath, in which inmates were dunked, then hung out on a wall in winter until ice formed on their skin. The mad chair, which bound an inmate so tightly that circulation was cut off, later necessitating amputations. The iron gag, in which an inmate's hands were tied from the back and strapped to an iron collar in their mouth, so that any movement caused the tongue to tear and bleed profusely. Since the prison closed in 1971, dozens of paranormal researchers visit every year and report that it's a hub of otherworldly activity. Perhaps most convincingly, there are the stories of eerie experiences by visitors, staff, guards, and inmates that have corroborated each other since the 1940s. Cell Block 12 is known for echoing voices and cackling, Cell Block 6 for shadowy figures darting along the walls, Cell Block 4 for visions of ghostly faces. Many people have reported seeing a silhouette of a guard in one of the towers, footsteps, wails, whispers, the same stories over and over again. And lastly, in at number 1, we have the Shanghai tunnels in Portland, Oregon. Located below Portland, Oregon are a complex maze of tunnels that lead all over the city. These tunnels were created and used for Shanghaiing. Shanghaiing was the practice of stealing able-bodied men and then selling them onto the ship captains for the purpose of work. These men were sold for as little as $50 a head and often spent many years in captivity at sea. These poor men were then forced to work on ships bound for the Orient with no pay. According to legend, as well as some historical data, men were shanghaied in Portland from roughly 1850 to 1941. Things were supposedly at their worst during Prohibition. The Shanghai tunnels, or Portland Underground, consist of tunnel passages linking Portland's Old Town, Chinatown, to the central downtown area of Portland. The basements of many downtown bars and hotels were linked to the Willamette River waterfront through the tunnels, allowing supplies to be moved from ships docked there directly to basements for storage. Since the mid-19th century, stories have been told about Shanghai practices in Portland. Not only men, but also women were warned to take care against being drugged or kidnapped and hauled off for sale. Women were stolen and sold to men also, but not for shipping labor at the same value as men. The middlemen would wait at the bar for an able-looking man to take the seat next to him. He would attempt to gain his trust, buy him a drink, and then drug him. Once drugged, they would drop the man down the trapdoors located in the bar. Once in the tunnels, they were locked in specially designed prison cells and held captive until they were shipped off as slave laborers. During Prohibition, it is said that the bars moved their operations underground, as well as making it easier than ever for unsuspecting victims to be shanghaied. It is said that around 1,500 people were kidnapped a year through the tunnels, and various stories have been told. The locals often dispute that the tunnels were used for this reason. Others believe in the stories and evidence found in the tunnels. Not only were these people held prisoner in the tunnels until their sale, some even died as a result of the conditions underground. The tunnels are said to be haunted by the aggrieved spirits of the captives who died in the dark recesses beneath the city. Those who have toured the tunnels have heard running in the distance, screams coming from all directions, and sometimes even crying from deep within the tunnels. With such a dark past, it is no surprise the locals deny any of this happening and may have even covered up the details. Coming in at number 5, we have Gibraltar Point Lighthouse in Canada. The lighthouse was built in 1808 to guide ships to Toronto's harbour from what was then a sandy peninsula until it was decommissioned in 1958. The lighthouse is the oldest one left on the Great Lakes and the second oldest in Canada. The lighthouse was there during the Battle of York in 1813 when American ships invaded the town of York, which culminated with the burning of the Parliament buildings. The British retaliated later in the War of 1812 and burned the White House down. During the war, the first lighthouse keeper, J.P. Reidmuller, a German immigrant to Upper Canada, kept watch at Gibraltar Point for enemy ships and friendly vessels returning to a safe harbour. Reidmuller disappeared under mysterious circumstances on January 2, 1815. The story is told that some soldiers were enjoying his homemade beer. Once drunk, they attacked Reidmuller. They then cut him up and buried him in the nearby area. No reason is known for the attack. Although the town around the lighthouse is now gone, the stories still remain, and some visitors to the land have reported some haunted sites. The current lighthouse keeper has told stories of searching for the remains of J.P. Reidmuller that were never found. Those who have visited the lighthouse have heard noises of someone walking around, paired with groaning noises. Some suspect the spirit of the first keeper still watches over. Others have seen the light on from a distance, even though it's been out of use for decades. Coming in at number 4, we have Yorktown Memorial Hospital in Texas. Originally built in the 1950s and managed by the Felician Sisters of the Roman Catholic Church, the Yorktown Memorial Hospital contains 2 main floors, a basement, 2 wings, a chapel, and an observation tower. The hospital closed in 1986, says current caretaker, after a new facility opened in nearby Curo. From then on, the building operated as a rehab facility, but the state closed it in 1992. Standing outside of the hospital today, it appears to be the definition of haunted. Broken windows lead into a black interior. The door is chained shut. Inside the building, a cool breeze wafts down the dark hallway. Leaves press against dusty windows and wasps crawl along the walls. Rumor has it that hundreds of patients died there due to malpractice. Since its closure, it sat there becoming a more derelict and terrifying place to enter. Naturally, it has acquired a lasting reputation for ghosts. There are stories of patients killed by neglect or surgical mistake, and the ghost of the surgeon who is often held responsible. If you decide to enter the building and make your way to the chapel, you might come across the old surgeon. It is said he appears like a dark shadow with red eyes. If anyone tries to read anything from the Bible within the chapel, he will make screaming noises in an attempt to get you to stop. A passerby also told the story of how they looked through the chain doors at the front of the building and they saw a young man looking back at him. His skin was white and he had a bullet wound in the middle of his head with the leftover dried blood running down his face. He was startled and jumped back when he saw this. On second look, the ghost had disappeared. Everyone who visits has a number of different experiences. It is unknown just how many spirits belong here. There are many unexplained cold spots and others have feelings of dread coming and going while they walk around. The second floor is known to be home to the spirit of the nuns who originally owned the building. For some reason, they have a distaste for men with tattoos. There have been a few stories of these men being scratched or pushed over by spirits. Even with knowing all of this, the hospital has struggled with break-ins, people looking to be unauthorized ghost hunters and looking for souvenirs. If you are looking to venture into the unknown, you can pay $500 for an overnight investigation. In at number 3, we have Myrtle's Plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana. The plantation was built in 1796. The house is reportedly built over an Indian burial ground, which is never a good sign. The original owner and architect of the Myrtle's Plantation was General David Bradford. He purchased 600 acres of land and built an 8-bedroom home on the property, naming it Laurel Ridge. When David died, his property was passed down to his daughter Sarah and her new husband Clark. Clark wanted to expand the plantation and therefore planted about 650 acres of indigo and cotton. They owned slaves who took care of the land and cared for their children. There is a story told of one girl named Chloe. Clark was having an affair with Chloe against her wishes. She was scared to come forward and tell Sarah as she feared being sent to the fields. One day she was attempting to eavesdrop on Sarah and Clark when she was found. As punishment, they cut off one of her ears. Chloe wanted revenge for the way she had been treated, so she bakes a birthday cake for the family with oleander. Clark chose not to eat any of the cake, but Sarah and the children did. They got very sick and Sarah and 2 of the children died, leaving only Clark and his daughter Octavia. The other slaves would not help Chloe escape. Afraid of the wrath her actions may place on them, they hung her from a tree on the property. Since then, there have been sightings of Chloe around the property. She has even been captured in pictures taken there. She is usually seen in a reflection of one of the windows. It is clear to see when the apparition is Chloe due to her missing ear. These are not the only deaths that occurred at the plantation. Once Clark only had his daughter, he moved and sold off the property. One of the unfortunate people to call it home was William Winters. William was shot on the porch. He crawled back into his home and attempted to crawl up the stairs, but only made it to the 7th step. It is said if you take a picture of the stairs, you can still see the bloodstains left over from his attack. If you are in a different room, you may also hear a dragging noise coming from the front entryway. These are just the ghosts who we know of. If the house is built on an Indian burial ground, we can't be sure just how haunted the place is or who exactly haunts it. In at number 2, we have House of the Seven Gables, Salem. The House of Seven Gables was built in 1668 by a Salem sea captain and merchant named John Turner. 3 generations of the Turner family lived in the seaside mansion before it was sold to Captain Samuel Ingersoll in 1782. An active captain during the Great Age of Sail, Ingersoll died at sea, leaving the property to his daughter Susanna, a cousin of famed author Nathaniel Hawthorne. The house is known for being one of the key locations during the Salem witch trials. In 1692, the first woman was accused of witchcraft. Her name was Sarah Good. It was said that just before her death, she cursed the priest, saying, "I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take my life, God will give you blood to drink." Some say that this cursed not only the priest, but the land. Her story was recently turned into a 3-part trilogy, Fear Street, where her last name was was changed to fear. Since then, it was believed that the area was cursed and hauntings continued to plague the town. Of course, Sarah was not the only woman who had this horrible fate. 30 other women were found guilty of witchcraft and others suffered while being accused. They even locked away a 5-year-old girl, Sarah's daughter, for 6 months while deciding if she was guilty. There is no doubt that the land has known suffering and many tortured souls died here. There have been reports of disembodied voices around the house. One man reported that during his visit to the house he felt the presence of a woman. She got closer to him and he heard a whisper of shh in his ear. There's also been many reports of people seeing figures in the distance around the property. If you attempt to approach these figures, they will disappear, meaning you can never get close to them. The house is now a museum for the witch trials as well as the life of Nathaniel Hawthorne. They offer ghost tours so you can learn more about the horrors that happened here. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Rolling Hills Asylum in New York. Rolling Hills Asylum was actually a poorhouse for those in need. Often resembling a reformatory, a poorhouse often housed orphan children, families, destitutes, elderly, physically handicapped, mentally unstable, morally corrupt, and even criminals. These institutions were situated on the grounds of a poor farm on which able-bodied residents were required to work. Such farms were common in the United States in the 19th and early 20th centuries. These sites were often run by the local government. On December 4th, 1826, the Genesee County Board of Supervisors met in Bethany for the purpose of establishing a county poorhouse. A brick building, originally a stagecoach tavern, was expanded to create the housing. A statement was put out to the community outlining who was eligible. Anyone seen as destitute was ordered to move to the poorhouse. This meant mixing the elderly and homeless families with the criminally insane. They invited lunatics and drunkards to live and work on the farm. It was a self-sufficient community and the cost of living for each resident was very low. Residents were referred to as inmates no matter why they were there. Everyone was viewed as the same once there. The able-bodied would build, raise animals, or try to sell produce to the local communities. As they grew, they opened a bakery and wood shop, which created and sold coffins. The county would bury those who had no family, and records indicate there was once a cemetery located on the property, but the particulars are almost non-existent. These people were neglected and forgotten by society. It's unknown how many people died here, but it is believed to be a few thousand. They were often buried without any record of who they were. As they were self-sufficient, the government hardly interfered with their affairs, so many died of illness, old age, and other deaths were from unknown causes. There are not many stories from those who lived here, so the particulars of day-to-day life is unknown. One can only imagine the horrors that could have occurred from putting all of the criminally insane with the unfortunate orphans, widows, and unwed mothers. Due to all of this, it is seen as one of the most haunted locations in the area. There are a few known stories of the spirits who still roam the land. One tragic story is of a boy named Roy. He suffered with gigantism, a physical deformity that left him with a protruding facial feature, large hands and feet, and a height of over 7 feet. Roy was the son of a prominent banker, and his physical appearance was an embarrassment to his family. At age 12, Roy was dropped at the Genesee County home and was left there until his death at age 62. Roy liked opera music and was generally kind. There have been reports of his large shadow being seen around the grounds, particularly moving around the main building. It is believed he likes to watch through the windows of what is going on with the area today. Not all spirits who live here are as friendly as Roy. There was once a nurse believed to be called Emmy, who was believed to have performed satanic rituals, inviting not only new spirits to roam the land but also keep any that tried to leave attached to it. She herself was said to be cruel and wicked. It is said when she is in your presence you will feel a weight on your chest and an uneasy feeling. We'll never know just how many spirits are stuck here or the horrors they might have faced.
Coming in number 5, a tiny hand. Mind you, this 5-fingered appendage doesn't truly belong to anyone. Rest assured, there is no petite individual walking around out there with a stub starting at their wrist. Or is there? Well, we haven't found any creatures with 5 fingers aside made of bronze yet, so as of right now this hand is totally its own thing. However, there's a lot to be gleaned from its existence. Plus, it was found in a titular, mysterious location and probably has some sort of magic imbued within. Could be cool, could be dangerous. That always seems to be the risk while working with the paranormal, eh? There are a few theories concerning the hand, none of which seem to imply a lack of bloodshed. Quite the opposite it seems. Lots and lots of bloodshed associated with the tiny bronze figurine. Makes sense, doesn't it? The metallic piece was picked up in the ancient Roman fortress of Vindolanda in England. If we know anything about the Romans, is that they were peaceful, conflict-avoiding people. Just a little joke for you folks at home. Really though, there's not much likelihood that this hand was left behind for any reason other than the killing of many. Great. It may have been associated with the worship of a very mysterious cult, one that prayed to a lesser known deity that seemed to guarantee conquest on the battlefield. Who knows what other weird activities this niche religious group got up to. Probably nothing too healthy or friendly. There's also the idea that this was left behind as an offering to a god, maybe that of the cult, after a major invasion of what would become Scotland. This invasion turned into more of a slaughter, with historians estimating that thousands of tribespeople living in the area now known as Scotland were killed. There were talks of peace, but those on the Scottish side made some last minute changes, resulting in them being labeled rebels. So after the Roman army plowed through and took their revenge, this hand of God was left behind as an offering to the powers that allowed them to win so decisively. Holding on to this tiny hand now might cause the souls of thousands of ancient Scots to look negatively upon you. Don't know if that sounds like a whole lot of fun. Coming in number 4, the Hands Resist Him painting. Now this already sounds very creepy, and one look at the painting confirms that it is. It's unsettling on a whole other level. Goodness me. You might have heard about this one already, as it made some waves when first discovered. In fact, some gave it the nickname the Haunted eBay Painting, which is a great title for anything you can purchase. Tell me you wouldn't want to hang that over your mantle and tell everyone who came by about your haunted eBay painting. You'd be the talk of the town in no time, with kids running past your yard at full speed and spooky widows dropping by for tea. Someday. But in the meantime, you can learn of the story behind the Hands Resist Him painting. See, it was dredged up at an old rundown brewery. A couple had been looking through the ruins for whatever people looked through old breweries for, and came across this horrid image. 2 children, creepy as can be, looking straight at the portrait artist, as some disembodied hands seem to float in the window behind them. Man, plenty of hands without arms on the list today. Must be a sign. Who's gonna send a nice hand into the studio? Look at the little girl's face. Are those doll features? Has her soul been stolen? Answers we may never get. During this painting's time on eBay, folks came up with all sorts of stories to go along with it. Some said that the kids would move around in frame, taking on different poses and positions when folks weren't looking. The hands were known to switch up their positioning too. All in all, a very distressing combination of paint and canvas. It ended up selling for something like $1,000, which is a little low if you ask me. Somehow, the stories caught up to the original painter too, who was quite surprised that everyone had been spinning yarns about his work. Bill Stoneham, the artist, says that the piece was based on an old photograph of himself and a neighbor when they were children, and that he wanted to tap into the Jungian idea of the collectus unconscious. So it might not be haunted, or at least it wasn't when he painted it, but the stories people tell seem to imply otherwise, so we'll see. Coming in at number 3, we've got the tomb of Simon McTavish. I want to tell this story specifically because I was recently hiking Mount Royal. Maybe I walked by something exceptionally haunted and didn't even notice. Wouldn't be too out of character, that's for sure. However, what was discovered quite a while ago spooks locals to their core. Mount Royal is a lovely elevated plateau that overlooks the city of Montreal and is home to one of the largest intact burial grounds in North America. Plenty of haunted potential here, but there's one ghost in particular that really grabs people's attentions, and it's the ghost of one Simon McTavish. A fur baron with a short temper, McTavish wasn't exactly well liked. He was overseeing the construction of his magnificent castle, and he suddenly died and was placed in a lavish tomb. His ghost stuck around though, spooking his neighbors plenty. So they did what any rational group of people would do and collapsed his castle to bury the tomb. Years later though, archaeologists rediscovered this buried tomb, and now folks believe that his ghost is free once more, zipping along the mountainside. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Haunted Child Spirit Doll. Haunted dolls are so in right now, eh? What other cursed item warrants an entire movie series complete with merchandise, books, and a totally redesigned Annabelle? This one isn't nearly as famous as Robert the Doll or the aforementioned Conjuring spin-off though. However, that doesn't make it any less haunted or any less scary. Back when buying all sorts of supposedly haunted items on eBay was all the rage, this doll caught a whole bunch of eyes and garnered plenty of attention. The story goes like this. A family moved into a home built in the 1920s, and they found all sorts of interesting things inside. One particularly fascinating find was an old baby doll. They didn't know how long it had been there or who it belonged to, but boy did it give off some wicked vibes. Soon after discovering this doll, odd happenings started up. Electronic toys would power on with nobody to do so, doors would swing open without anybody around, children in the house would experience vivid nightmares, disembodied footsteps could be heard, and ghosts of old men and women were spotted in the basement. Holy moly. The seller left a little disclaimer saying that she can't take responsibility for whoever buys it, but it did indeed sell. Final asking price? $57.50. Huh. I would have thought a genuine haunted doll would go for a little more. Maybe with a more sensational backstory. We'll see where it goes next. And coming in at number 1, we've got the Black Sarcophagus. See if you can come to a similar conclusion as me here. Back in 2018, a mystery tomb was discovered in Alexandria. Delving deep within, archaeologists pulled out a very cursed-looking black sarcophagus. When announced to the world, all sorts of theories about the dark stone coffin proliferated. Could it be sealing away an ancient enemy of the people? Is some sort of cryptid contained within? What if opening this unleashed a curse upon the world, dooming us forever? The folks in charge of it decided that no risk outweighed potential discovery, so they popped it open. Inside lay the remains of 3 officers and some goopy liquid. Maybe not so bad. But I lean towards that curse more than anything else. Why would the sarcophagus be the color of classical evil if not to contain said evil? What world-ending curse could have popped out? Well, it might have been a spell that awakens some horrible beast, still regaining its strength. Or maybe it brainwashes some powerful people, instilling eldritch knowledge and a hatred of humanity in them. Or could it be that the curse will show up in the form of a plague? 2018, huh? Let that one marinate for a while.
Coming in at number 5, we have Capuchin Monastery Catacombs, Palermo, Italy. This location is not for the squeamish. The Capuchin Monastery Catacombs is home to thousands of well-dressed corpses, one of the world's most bizarre and morbid tourist attractions. After walking through the monastery, you descend into the catacombs, where you have the chance to share small, enclosed space with thousands of corpses that have been well preserved. Some hanging from the walls, some laying down, and others sat on benches. They believe that having the dead on display like this shows respect to them. Here, nothing stands between the living and the dead, other than a sign asking people to be respectful. The ill-lit, musty catacombs have been separated into a few corridors, each one hosting a specific type of person. There is a room for religious figures, mainly those affiliated with the monastery, for professionals such as doctors, and a room for women. There is a corpse of a person that's said to be so well preserved that she simply looks like she is sleeping. She has been given the name Sleeping Beauty. I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty terrifying. It is believed that the particularly dry atmosphere allowed for the natural mummification of the bodies. Initially, priests would lay the dead on shelves and allow them to drip until they were completely depleted of bodily fluids. A full year later, the dried out corpse would be rinsed with vinegar before being redressed in their best attire and sent to their proper room to stand for eternity. Who knows how many of their spirits still roam the catacombs with no way out? It's not a question I want to find the answer to. In at number 4, we have Black Swan Hotel in York, England. The city of York was built back in 71 AD and was founded between 8000 and 7000 BC. First inhabited by Romans, then Vikings, it has a long history, making it the perfect place for ghosts and spirits to roam. Some have even claimed that it is the most haunted city in the world. Just one of the many haunted locations in York is the Black Swan pub. It was built for William Bowes, a merchant and sheriff of York, in 1417, who also became Lord Mayor in 1428. There are few unusual features and stories surrounding the pub. There is a passageway that was built under the building. It is unclear why this was built, but there have been rumors it once led to the church. It has since been sealed off, but you can still see the stairs leading down under the building and a hallway leading off into the distance. The pub was used as a horse refuge during World War II, and there are even stories of men coming to the pub to auction off their wives during 1884. Through the history of the building, there have been a few spirits who have decided to stick around. One of the regulars is a workman in a bowler hat who regularly fidgets and tuts, as if he is waiting for someone to arrive. He is often seen walking from room to room or waiting at the bar before fading away. No one knows who this spirit is, but it is believed he has been here since 1850, when bowler hats were introduced. Some say he resembles Charlie Chaplin. But he is not the only spirit who inhabits the pub, also frequently seen as a young woman in a long white dress. She stands at the bar in the back room gazing into the fireplace. You can see the grief in the woman's face. She appears to be dealing with some kind of loss. This is just one of the many haunted buildings around York, so travel here at your own risk. In at number 3, we have the Alaskan Hotel in Alaska. Built in 1913 during the gold rush, the Alaskan Hotel is the oldest hotel in the area. The hotel was built to be a luxury experience for those passing by, as they advertised as a pocket version of the finest hostelry on the west coast. The high fashion and glitz were a paltry concealment for the legal prostitution and sale of illicit substances that went on there throughout its history. The hotel overcame many issues that it faced since opening, one being the 1980 imposition of bone-dry prohibition. They turned their bar into a cafe serving soda while also running a speakeasy like most of the previous bars at the time. The Alaskan Hotel was a brothel twice in her history, first legally and second not legal in 1977, which was shut down by the fire marshal. There is one main soul who inhabits the Alaskan Hotel today, and that is a gold miner's wife. She lived at the hotel while waiting for him to return. When he did not return, she began to support herself through prostitution. But then he did return. When he returned to his wife, he was furious with what she had been doing and then murdered her in the hotel. There have since been a number of sightings of her at the hotel. She is said to be very angry and restless. When she is around, the air goes cold and some have reported hearing footsteps wandering the halls. Some even hear crying coming from the walls, but it is unclear where the noise is coming from. There is also a number of abandoned mines located near the town, so if you're looking for ghosts, this is the place to be. Coming in at number 2, we have City of the Dead, North Ossetia, Russia. Not many people have been to the City of the Dead. It is a dangerous and long journey to reach the village. There are also myths and legends warning that those who do reach the city never return. Reaching this mystifying destination requires a 3-hour drive, taking you down a dangerous and hidden road. It is located in North Ossetia in Russia. If you do manage to reach the city, you will come across many white huts that look like houses. However, they are not. These are actually stone crypts. It is said that in the 18th century a plague hit the city, leaving no one behind. The clans built quarantine houses for the sick. They would bring the food but not the freedom to move about until death claimed their lives. The even sadder side is that people who did not have family to build the hut or bring them food simply went to the large graveyard and simply waited for death. It was a very slow and painful way to go. For those who dare to visit the city, a little well was created outside of each home. If you drop a coin in the well and you hear it hit the stone at the bottom, then the person who died here went to heaven. If you do not hear a noise, then this indicates that the spirit did not pass on and may still be in the village. My advice would be don't visit this city. We don't need an 18th century disease. And lastly, in at number 1, we have Craig de Rock Castle in Victoria, British Columbia. What first appears to be a beautiful castle is actually a haunted home with a tragic past. The Craig de Rock Castle was built in the 1800s as a home for a wealthy family, coal industrialist Robert Dunsmuir and his wife Joan. It was built over 2,300 meters and comprises 39 rooms. However, Robert died 17 months before the construction was completed. The original architect of the castle, Warren Haywood Williams, also unfortunately died before the finalization of the home. His son James and Alexander decided to finish the castle after their father's death. Robert's death caused a lot of trouble within the family. His sons James and Alex were disappointed that their father's business and assets had been left to their mother. They claimed that they had an oral agreement from their father that they would receive the family business. For the following years, they tried countlessly to get the family business from their mother, and after 7 years they finally received the title to the San Francisco Company. Feeling financially stable, Alex finally married his partner of 20 years, Josephine. However, their marriage only lasted 6 weeks as he died on their honeymoon in New York. When he died, the family was torn apart once more over his will. Joan and James fought for years, going to the highest court level. They did not speak during the legal battle, and then finally Joan passed away in 1908 in Craig de Rock Castle in Victoria, where she lived for 18 years. It was believed that James wouldn't attend her funeral, however he did at last. The house has now been taken over by the Craig de Rock Castle Historical Museum Society. There have been many ghost stories presumed to be connected to the Dunsmuir family. One of the main spectres is a woman who walks down the main staircase in a ball gown. No one has seen her in any other part of the castle, and she never goes up the stairs. Could it be the ghost of Joan going to greet her husband? In the basement of the home there have been sightings of a little girl crying, although they disappear if she hears anyone approaching. There have been multiple sightings of her. She is believed to be the youngest daughter of Robert, who died just months after he did. As well as these sightings, there have also been other weird goings on around the castle. Often people hear the crying of a child from various parts of the castle. Objects would also move on their own when no one was around. Some can also hear a piano being played in the dining room when no one is present, but there is no piano in the castle. It seems there are many ghosts of the Dunsmuir family within the castle walls who don't want to leave their home.
Number 5, Isle of the Dolls. I'm not a good Spanish speaker, man. Do you ever get creeped out when you see a baby doll lost somewhere, like on the side of the road or something? You know, a cute little plaything, caked in muck and grime, lost out in the woods? Dolls have been a staple of horror movies and stories for years, and it's easy to see why. There's always a bit of an uncanny valley thing, those lifeless eyes staring at you. Well, imagine if you had to deal with an island of hundreds, if not thousands, of dolls staring at you. Do you think you'd handle that well? South of the center of Mexico City lies the infamous Isla de las Muñecas, or the Island of the Dolls, and I am so sorry to my native Spanish speakers for that butchering. It received the name from the island's inhabitants, which are solely dolls. Legend goes, in the 1950s, the island was the property of one Don Julian Santana Barrera, who used to preach superstitions around and was expelled from the region, living alone on this island. One day, a young girl had drowned and was found washed up in the banks of the island. Santana claims that he heard the girl crying out, "I want my doll," and discovered a washed up doll on the bank as well. He hung the doll up in a tree and claims that since that event, he would find a doll every time he went outside. It became his passion, or obsession, possibly more accurately. Hundreds upon hundreds of dolls line the trees of the island, hanging from just about every inch of available space. Barrera would end up passing away on the island as well, drowning in the same spot that the girl drowned in all those years ago. Locals believe it was a curse from the girl's lingering spirit that still lays dormant on the island. Since then, the island has become a popular tourist spot for paranormal hunters. I mean, look at the place. I didn't even need to tell you a backstory for you to surmise that this is probably a haunted island. It's only accessible via a boat ride, and some guides will actually outright refuse to take you to the Island of the Dolls for fear of cursing. If you do go, I don't know, bring a doll, maybe. I probably couldn't hurt, just don't take any, okay? This is one of those things where you take only pictures, leave only footprints, and maybe leave a haunted doll as well. And if you're looking to go on a vacation without even leaving your home, Top 5 Scary has tons of videos of cursed places, ghost sightings, aliens, cryptids, true crime, basically anything spooky you can think of, we've done a video on it. Click through the archives, stay subscribed, and stay scared, more importantly. Okay, but let's keep going, we got a whole lot more video to go. Number 4. The Waverly Hills Sanatorium. The Waverly Hills Sanatorium has had a real storied history as far as a building goes. It began its life as a hospital, eventually became a nursing home, and now is considered one of the most haunted spots in the United States. Quite the resume. It first opened in Louisville, Kentucky in the year 1910 to treat new incoming tuberculosis patients. That year, a recently built hospital had moved all of their TB patients over to the sanatorium, who had to put up tents to accommodate all of their new guests. The sanitarium housed thousands of patients over the years before the hospital would close to convert into that nursing home in 1961. Now, the estimates may vary because there's not a lot written down, but the estimates say that as many as 64,000 people died inside the sanatorium. 64,000! That is insane! Now, if you've played Red Dead Redemption, I don't need to tell you how bad tuberculosis is. It used to be dubbed the White Plague for its high mortality rate before more advanced treatments became commonplace in curing the illness in the late 40s. So around the time of the sanatorium, it was mostly a death sentence. So is it any surprise that Waverly is said to contain lost, tormented souls unable to move forward? No, not particularly. There's an underground tunnel from the sanatorium to the bottom of the hill, which was used to transport dead patients. The tunnel was supposedly haunted by those who made their last journey through it. One of the most notable haunted spots in the building though is room 502, which is said to contain the ghost of a nurse in uniform. There's a couple different legends corresponding to this. One says that the nurse took her life jumping out of that window, and another who said the nurse took her life by hanging because she was pregnant. And neither one of those is particularly pleasant to think about as the good option. These days, if you're feeling particularly brave, the sanatorium has opened its doors once again, offering tours for would-be paranormal investigators looking to get a couple beeps on their EVP meters. Just don't say that nobody warned you. Number 3. Epping Forest. Nothing quite like a good haunted forest, is there? Nice tall trees really provoke the imagination when it comes to campfire stories, and Epping Forest is quite the setting for all kinds of creepy spine chillers. The size and density of Epping Forest has made it an infamous spot for all kinds of criminals to conduct and plan their devious crimes. In the early 1700s, it was the hunting grounds of one particularly infamous highwayman, Richard Turpin, who would hid there and commit robberies. Now, since then, More than a dozen bodies have been found, all in disgusting, horrifying conditions since the 1960s. So these spooky woods have become home to all manner of urban legend and hearsay about the crimes that have taken place here. It's developed a real rep for spooky, inexplicable noises and sights, including ghastly apparitions, with some claiming that the ghost of Turpin, the infamous bandit, still resides in the woods. Robbing other ghosts, I guess? God, imagine ghost on ghost crime. We need to do something about that. Ghostbusters, maybe. There's a legend that says that if you drive to Hangman's Hill and park your car in neutral, that your car will be slowly pulled uphill, drawn spiritually to a tree that once hung 3 witches on it, which was later cursed. But I gotta be honest, ignoring the witchy part, that actually sounds kind of fun. Just a little car getting towed uphill as part of a supernatural adventure, I'm on board with that. No doubt something that helps the forest have this scary reputation is its off-putting appearance. The trees have not been cut since the late 1800s, giving them an unusually overgrown, chaotic look. I can definitely relate to not having cut something since the 1800s. I think that's the last time I cut this mop of hair. Number 2, the Queen Mary. We've got a few good haunted woods, an old abandoned hospital, and I think for good measure we should toss in a haunted ship. Does this video not have any haunted houses? Wow, okay, hey, we're breaking new ground. There are few ships in the United States allegedly even half as haunted as the Queen Mary, a decommissioned ship that was converted into a hotel in Long Beach, California. It's stately, lush, and its lower decks are filled to bursting with restless spirits. The ship was christened in the mid-30s by Queen Mary herself, hence the name, and it was retired 3 decades later when it was then converted into a hotel where guests can go and sleep in a stateroom and roleplay that they're crossing the Atlantic in style. But the continental breakfast is far from the only reason anyone goes to check it out, although I have heard it's amazing. Just make sure you get there early, those eggs go fast. There's a variety of hotspots that are said to be congregation points for spirits. The most famous is stateroom B340, a problem before the place was even haunted, actually. In 1948, a passenger, Walter J. Adamson, passed away in the room under unknown conditions. Nothing came of it until 1966. A woman staying in the room reported she was woken up when the bed covers were pulled away and she saw a spectral man standing at the foot of her bed. She didn't assume this was the room service, so she screamed and rang for a steward, but as soon as somebody arrived, the man had vanished. Guests staying at the room claim they hear someone knocking at the door in the middle of the night. The Mary's maids complain that they find water running in B340 when no one's been in it in days. Wet bandits, that's a sign of the wet bandits for sure. People have reported all kinds of ghosts around the pool as well. Some notable ones include a woman in an old wedding gown next to a young boy in a suit, a cloud of steam appearing out of nowhere along with a girl in a blue and white dress who disappears and reappears in an instant. Oof. I'll stay on the land, I think, where all the land ghosts are. At least I know what those ones are. I trust them. And number 1, the Mal Dyer Rock. Do you believe in witches? For the residents of Leonardtown, Maryland, their town's history has been plagued by rumors and accusations surrounding one infamous resident, Mal Dyer, the Witch of Leonardtown. In the early 17th century, illness was ravaging this small community, taking a harsh toll on crops and wildlife, and the difficulty of the winter had crushed most residents' hopes of surviving the season. The town was deeply religious, and the harsh season led the townsfolk to believe a witch was to be blamed instead of just like poles and seasons and stuff, but they didn't really have a lot of books, so witches made a lot more sense. The church had determined that one resident in particular, Mal Dyer, an old widow who lived alone on the edge of town, was the witch who was tormenting the villagers. I get it, old crone on the edge of town, bad season, all the crops died. It definitely sounds like she was a witch. But it wasn't long before hurtful hearsay like that turned into a pitchfork-wielding mob who burned down Mal's small hut. Mal ran from the fire into the wilderness, but, being an old woman, collapsed shortly. She grabbed onto a boulder and raised her left hand to the moon and allegedly cursed at the village for what they had done to her. Her body was found frozen with her hand held upwards towards the sky. Since then, the boulder she was found on has been dubbed the Mal Dyer Rock and is actually protected with plexiglass in an attempt to contain whatever curse that she unleashed onto the world. Many supernatural events are reported in the woods around this rock, ranging from shadow people, will-o-wisps, stories of spirits running through the road causing car accidents, thick unnatural fog, and lightning strikes around the rock are all common legends and elements of Mal Dyer's ancient curse on the town of Leonardsville. Now, some fun little trivia for some horror movie fans out there. The story of Maud Dyer served as one of the inspirations for the titular character in the cult classic horror flick Blair Witch Project, you know, about a spooky witch who got isolated in the woods. So if you're ever visiting Maryland and you want to see Maud Dyer's rock, make sure to bring the video camera, shake it all up a bunch, because if you play your cards right, that's a 3-picture deal and a whole movie franchise. Number 5, Fengdu Ghost City. Fengdu Ghost City. Well, right off the bat, I feel like this is probably a spooky place. You don't name cities Ghost City unless there's a good reason for it. Well, the good reason is that the city got its name during the Eastern Han Dynasty. 2 imperial nobles, Yin Changshen and Wang Fengpin, came to Ming Mountain to discover a way to achieve immortality. Combining their 2 names, Yin and Wang, Ying Wang, translates to King of Hell, and that cemented the site as an underworld hotspot. Since then, the place was built to be a shrine to the underworld, with several temples showing paintings and sculptures of people being punished for their sins and cast into eternal damnation. It's pretty spooky, but honestly it's pretty cool. It's good craftsmanship. And there is some rich folklore to go with the place. Chinese mythology and beliefs say that the dead must pass 3 tests before they're allowed to cross into the underworld, which sounds exhausting to me. I can't even enjoy the relief of death before you're asked to solve some riddles and pass some tests. The village is kind of like a place to conduct these tests, and now you can actually go to it yourself and do it as a tourist attraction and watch performers act out all the trials. But here's the trials. The first test is passing the Bridge of Helplessness, which does sound a little bit like it's from one of the Dark Souls games. It was built during the Ming Dynasty, and good souls are allowed to pass, while evil ones will fall into the water below. Then, you proceed to Ghost Torturing Pass. Oh, that's a fun place to be, where they present themselves for judgment. Finally, the last test is at the entrance to Tianzi Palace, where the ghost must stand on a certain stone on 1 foot for 3 minutes straight. I don't know why I'm standing on 1 foot when the camera is above my waist. You can't tell what I'm doing. I could be standing on as many feet as I want. A good soul will be able to do it, an evil one will fall over. Now this site now is a popular tourist destination due to its very unique structures and fascinating, if not a little bit horrifying decor. I'd want one of those little statues maybe have in my house. I think they're kind of cool, to be honest. And if you're looking for more hellish haunted spots, terrifying tales of poltergeists, ghosts, ghouls, cryptids, aliens, and all kinds of freaks under the sun and above it, while Top 5 Scary is simply the only place to be. Subscribe and stay scared. Number 4, Kaishiku Grounds. If you go to Kaishiku today, you probably wouldn't think much of it at all. Most notable thing around there is a subway station, and aside from that, there's a vegetable market outside, and you can probably score a pretty decent deal on corn. But if you visited Kaishiku back in the 19th century, however, when it served as an execution grounds for prisoners, you probably wouldn't feel too welcome. Thousands of prisoners were brought to the Kaishiku grounds to serve out their last moments. Every autumn, prisoners were taken through the Zhuanwumen, which earned the fun nickname, the Gate of Death at dawn. Awesome. The doomed would then be lined up east to west, their necks stretched by rope to make it easier to chop. Well, that's good. We always want to make it as easy as possible for the guy chopping necks. A singular chop to the neck was considered the easy way out of a one-way trip to Kaishiku. Prisoners accused of more serious crimes would be sentenced to lingchi, which was a horrid punishment of slowly slicing someone many times, leading to it sensationally being dubbed the death of 1,000 cuts by outsiders. These executions were designed to be a public spectacle, something for everybody to come and enjoy, something for the whole family to do when no good movies were playing. Kaishiku was one of the busiest intersections in the outer city of Beijing, so crowds would gather to see these things. Most horrifically about this, though, is that sometimes the prisoners who were executed, their bodies were photographed and made into postcards. Given this sordid history, is it much of a surprise at all that passers-by and visitors claim that they can sometimes see ghostly apparitions making their way through the dark hours of the night, or that you can hear screams at all hours? If you ever visit Beijing and make a stop by Kaishiku, take a photo. The postcards they sell in the gift shop are a little dicey. Number 3, the Forbidden City. The Forbidden City. Well, that tracks. That sounds very forbidden. Well, back in the 14th century, when it stood as the heart of the Ming Dynasty and served as an imperial palace, yeah, you'd have a pretty difficult time getting access if you were but a common serf like myself. But I think they've relaxed their stance just a little bit, because I found more than a few Google recommended articles for tourist things to do in the Forbidden City. I think they just charge like price of admission now. So it's actually very easy to get into the Forbidden City, and the Chinese government does know about this. So the formerly Forbidden City, which is not quite as catchy a name, is a beautiful tourist spot and definitely worth checking out. It's got years upon years of culture and rich history behind it, and most importantly, it's said to be very haunted. The Forbidden City is a pretty credible place for a haunting, if I must say. Ghosts are said to be born out of a place of malice, and the Forbidden City has over 600 years of deaths, assassinations, and who knows how many backstabs and plot twists where the intrigue are out there. The most recurring ghost story coming out of the Forbidden City, though, is that there's a ghost of a weeping woman, all dressed in white, wandering during the dark hours. Following her is a lingering flute playing. Visitors claim at times they see ghost dogs that run through corridors at the edge of the city, digging up ghost bones. Some travelers report feeling an indescribable strangeness while wandering through the temples. Could it just be they're overcome with beauty and majesty of one of the wonders of the world, or is there spectral energy floating through the air? Before we move off on this one, I want you to take a look at this. A travel blog from Vancouver posted about their experiences traveling through the Imperial City. They noted how odd it was that all the doorways had a raised platform. The guide told them that was a way to confuse ghosts to keep them out. They took tons of photos, but only one stood out for them when they came back. See anything suspicious? Like a ghostly figure just kinda hanging right there in the center? Ugh. Number 2, Dead Fengmin Village. Coming up next on this list is going to be Fengmin Village. Fengmin Village is sometimes known as Dead Fengmin's Village, which is not exactly the most welcoming name you want to hear, but there's a pretty good reason for it though. The village itself is about as dead as a village can be, long abandoned by an unknown tribe. It's located in the valley of a nameless mountain in northern China's Henan province. An abandoned city left in a nameless mountain. It seems like it's the start of a chosen one, like heroic journey out there, start of a quest. The surrounding landscape is supposedly quite beautiful. A flowing brook, a lush forestry and trees, and buildings from the Qing dynasty. 39 buildings, 200 rooms, all of them left completely vacant. And the weird part? No one even knows why. There is extremely little information to be found on Fengmin Village. Who lived there, what happened to them, and so on, making it absolutely rife for urban legends of hauntings and ghosts. It's a fairly popular spot for backpackers and hikers with an interest in the supernatural who are looking to discover something in the lost village. One story tells of a hiker named Maitreya who would make expeditions out to Fengmin Village, camping alongside the river just outside with a few companions. On one of his treks, he got the bright idea in the middle of the night to prank his companions by jumping and scaring them, which, let me just say, I absolutely have to respect that. You're camping out in an abandoned ghost village, you have to seize the opportunity to prank your friends just a little bit. Well, before he got a chance, he got served up his own scare because he swears a discordant, sad-sounding voice kept calling his name out over and over, in a voice he said he couldn't recognize or had never heard before. And none of his friends had any idea what he was talking about. At number 1, Chaonai 81. Our next entry is Chaonai number 81, a building that has a fairly notable reputation, being listed as the most haunted building in Beijing. It's Beijing's most famous haunted house. The ghost most commonly reported in this house is that of a woman who was the wife of an officer in the National Revolutionary Army during the Chinese Civil War in the late 1940s. He had fled to Taiwan with his compatriots before the end of the war and left his precious wife behind. Naturally, she was pretty upset about this. She was despondent. She felt that without her husband, she had nothing left to live for and thusly took her own life. And her spirit has been trapped in the house ever since. Residents who live around the area claim that during thunderstorms you can hear shrill, violent screaming coming from inside the house. Visitors report that walking into the house immediately, you feel a cold chill come over you and a feeling of inescapable dread. Not good. Not good to feel those things. There's stories of people going inexplicably missing connected to this mysterious house. One notable story is that of a British priest who is said to have initially built the property to serve as a church who went missing shortly before it was finished. When an investigation was launched to look for him, they supposedly discovered a secret tunnel that led to a neighborhood in the northeast, and the priest's body was never discovered. Now, another story was that 3 construction workers in the basement of a neighboring building weren't paying attention to what they were doing and broke through a thin wall leading into building 81. They went through the hole and the 3 of them vanished. And now there are people who conspire that this event is what led the government to cancel its plans to demolish the building for fear that it might be haunted. And it hasn't been yet because it's still standing there, and you're more than welcome to visit. You can take a guided ghost tour if you're feeling brave enough, and hopefully you come back.
Number 5. Area 51, Nevada. Starting out our list, we have the most obvious entry. In the American state of Nevada, you will find no shortage of places to go on vacation. Despite being a desert, you will find locations like the Hoover Dam, Red Rock Canyon, and of course, the various casinos and attractions in Las Vegas. Of course, a location that you will not find yourself getting into is the military base located on the salt flats of Groom Lake, which is colloquially known as Area 51. For years, Area 51 has been the subject of conspiracy theories involving everything from government testing to UFO activity. Adding to its mystique is the fact that the US government wouldn't even officially acknowledge that it existed until 2013. Its official use is apparently the testing of experimental aircraft, but the level of security at the base is extremely high, even for a government base. Employees of Area 51 are flown in on a private airline known as Janet Airlines, with Janet being an acronym that stands for just another non-existent terminal. Some former employees have reported getting paid through private companies that they have no involvement with in order to avoid a paper trail linking them to the base. Some theories about the purpose of Area 51 include it being used to develop energy weapons for the Strategic Defense Initiative, to develop time travel technology, and most infamously, for studying, storing, and reverse engineering the remains of crashed alien ships, including those that were found at the Roswell crash site. As it is a closed-off and secret government facility, tourists are of course not allowed to get into the site, with signs around the perimeter promising prosecution and possibly even deadly force against trespassers. Of course, this hasn't stopped alien enthusiasts from making the journey to Nevada to see the number of Area 51 and alien-adjacent attractions, such as bus tours of the extraterrestrial highway, the Black Mailbox, and the outskirts of this secret government facility. Number 4. The Princess Theatre, Alberta. In the Canadian city of Edmonton, Alberta, there is no shortage of movie theaters with multiple malls housing multiple multiplexes, enabling local cinema lovers to watch the latest in entertainment. However, for many years, the crown jewel for movie lovers in Edmonton was not the Cineplex in West Edmonton Mall, or even the Garneau Theatre, which shows independent and classic films. No, for many years, the most classic of the theaters was the Princess Theatre on White Avenue. Built in 1914 for a then staggering $75,000, this 3-story single-screen theater would show moving pictures, concerts, and vaudeville acts, while also having a basement billiards parlor for those not interested in the shows. The theater was known for implementing extremely novel and modern elements, such as a fireproof projection room, an electric time projection clock, an electronic ticketing machine, forced air ventilation, and even refrigerated fountain beverages. The theater was soon drawn into economic hardship and was forced to construct rental apartments on the upper and lower floors. One of these apartment renters was soon met with a tragic and disturbing end. According to local legend, an engaged woman lived in one of the upper apartments, but mere days before she was due to be wed, she was scorned by her fiancé. She was found hanging from the rafters while dressed in her wedding dress. In the years that followed, employees and patrons of the princess reported seeing a ghostly woman wearing a white dress who would suddenly appear and disappear, ascending the theater's grand staircase, wandering its ornate gold-leafed halls, or even hovering over the projection room. The princess was a staple for local cinema lovers, as well as fans of the paranormal for decades. But if you were interested in taking in a show or catching a glimpse of the ghostly bride, you may have missed your window, as the theater closed its doors after 108 years of operation in mid-2022. No new owners or plans for the historical theater have been announced, and the doors remained locked to the public, with only the ghosts still residing inside of this historic building. Number 3. Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center, Virginia. In a world that seems to constantly be on the brink of disaster, it is comforting to know that the US government has a safe location where the elite and powerful will be safe from destruction they most likely caused. Such is the purpose of the US Department of Homeland Security operated base located near Bluemont, Virginia. The Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center, otherwise known as the High Point Special Facility, has been in operation since the late 1800s, when it was used as a simple weather station. In 1928, the observatory building became President Calvin Coolidge's summer White House, before being used as a civilian public service facility where conscientious objectors could serve the government during World War II without having to go into conflict. In 1959, an underground facility was completed and designated Area B. The other buildings that were referred to as Area A became training facilities for the Federal Emergency Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. Around this time, it became a relocation site for high-level civilian and military officials in the event of a national disaster, such as an attack or massive natural disaster. It plays a major role in many of the United States government's contingency plans for maintaining the continuity of government. It has a high-frequency radio system, which connects it to most federal public safety agencies, which allows the president to access and use the emergency alert system so that they can broadcast emergency alerts or warnings. An example of its use was on September 11th, 2001, when the majority of congressional leadership were taken from Washington by helicopter and evacuated to Mount Weather. The National Art Gallery has also developed a program that would have the country's most valuable paintings helicoptered over to the facility in the event of an attack, in order to make sure important cultural pieces are preserved in the event of an attack that would otherwise destroy them. Obviously, this site is off limits to all but the most high level of people, and it is not open for tourists. But if you are nearby and see a large group of frantic-looking officials arriving by helicopter, or you see a message on TV from the president being broadcast from this facility, be very afraid, as it means that something terrifying and horrible has or is about to occur. Number 2. Boblo Island Amusement Park, Ontario. North America has no shortage of amusement parks for families and thrill seekers alike to visit. The Canadian province of Ontario has several to choose from, including Canada's Wonderland, Great Wolf Lodge, and Splashtown Niagara. One theme park that you won't be able to buy a ticket for, however, is the Boblo Island Amusement Park, located on the island of Bois Blanc, just above the mouth of the Detroit River. The park was opened in 1898 and used a ferry system to service guests from Ontario and Detroit and bring them to the island, where they had a variety of attractions to keep them occupied and having fun. Some of these included the Falling Star, a log flume, a theater, a sky tower, a Ferris wheel, a zoo, a carousel, and a dance hall, financed by Henry Ford himself. It also had 3 roller coasters: the Screamer, the Nightmare, and the Sky Streak. It also had Boblo's scoot boats, which were essentially aquatic bumper cars. The park operated for many years before eventually closing down for financial reasons in late 1993. There are still ferries that operate in order to get island residents on and off the island, but the now abandoned amusement park has been declared off limits by the property owners. Of course, the dilapidated carousel building, dance pavilion, and sky tower have since proven to be too appealing for urban explorers to keep away from, and the eerie overgrown site still sees a variety of visitors. Like any good amusement park, it of course has a reputation for being haunted by a variety of ghosts. My personal favorite of the ghost stories is the story of Smiley the Magician. Back when the theater still operated and showed a variety of different performers, one of the most consistently booked performers of the 30s and 40s was a magician named Smiley Smilovich. Smiley was an old-school magician who had trained with Houdini in the late 20s and was known for his seemingly death-defying tricks. One of his most famous tricks was a metamorphosis trick, where he would put a trunk on stage, climb into it, lock it, and then have the trunk set on fire. He would escape through a trap door, the trunk would burn away, revealing that he had escaped, and the crowd would go wild. One day he was doing this trick as usual, but when he locked himself in the trunk, he had a heart attack and died. The trunk was set on fire, and the audience was left in terror as Smiley's body burned in front of them. Ever since then, Smiley's ghost would apparently haunt the theater, being sighted watching shows that were performed there, showing a special interest in magic shows. In the years since the park's closure, the occasional rumor of the magician being spotted has come up from the various urban explorers checking out the overgrown buildings. Would you ever be brave enough to explore Boblo Island Amusement Park? And if you did, would you be on the lookout for spectral magicians? Number 1. North Brother Island, New York. The North Brother Island is one of 2 small islands located in the East River of New York City. The island remained uninhabited until 1885, with the only trace of humanity being a small lighthouse that was erected in 1869. The island began seeing more use in 1885 when the Riverside Smallpox Hospital moved from Roosevelt Island to North Brother, when their mission expanded to treating and isolating victims of other quarantinable diseases such as typhoid, tuberculosis, and especially polio. In 1904, a steamship called the General Slocum was set ablaze, and over 1,000 people perished, either from the fire or from drowning while trying to escape, and ended up washing ashore on the island. One of the most famous residents at the hospital was Mary Mallon, otherwise known as Typhoid Mary, who was confined on the island for 20 years until her death in 1938, after having been declared a public health menace for infecting between 51 and 122 people while working as a cook. As public health health measures like vaccines began to be adopted in the 30s and 40s, the need for a quarantine hospital lessened to the point where the hospital was closed. It was converted into housing for war veterans who were going to school in the city following World War II, before being converted into a rehabilitation facility for young people suffering from substance abuse issues. But it was closed in 1963 due to the cost of upkeep and the widespread corruption of the staff. In the years since, it was considered for a variety of purposes, including housing for the homeless and an extension of the jail at Rikers Island. But the danger of the unmarked manholes and the advanced dilapidation of the buildings, which are mostly collapsed and overrun by poison ivy, resulted in such ideas being abandoned. It was eventually decided that the site would serve as a bird sanctuary for herons and other wading shorebirds. Although many of the original 25 buildings are still standing in some shape or form, it has been made off limits to the public and is only available for supervised visits for those intending to go ashore for, quote, compelling academic and scientific purposes. With its history of confinement and death, perhaps it is best that this site has been deemed unfit for public visitation, although the history of the island is indeed compelling.